also live on YouTube. I'll post the link on the comments. Lindo, if the network continues being a problem, you can just use that. Cool. Awesome stuff. Right. So once again, okay, just to icebreaker Nyana. Why do programmers prefer dark mode? Eye problems for some. Eminently says get rid of bugs. Yes, Wetumelo, because light attracts bugs, right? So that's why programmers, in most cases, prefer dark mode. Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna have a quick rundown of the data types, like we did previously, right? So as we've mentioned, we essentially have four main data types in Python that we use. That is your strings, your integers, your floats, as well as Boolean. I think we spoke a lot on how essentially when you create any type of variable and store any kind of data type, Python recognizes as some sort of objects. Can be a string type of object, which will then give you access to your string methods, your is digits, is alpha, and all of the other string methods that we've used. Same thing goes for integers as well as booleans and floats as well, right? I think we really spoke a lot on these four data types. Cool. Just want to emphasize the point on while loops, right? Or the fundamental difference once again between a while loop and a for loop, right? The while loop in Python is used to repeatedly execute a block of code while a condition is true. So this loop will continue to execute as long as it remains true, right? We also have the else keyword in while loops. Has anyone encountered that actually? That you can actually have an else keyword in your while loop. Has anyone encountered that before? Well, the else keyword can be used to specify a block of code to execute once the loop has completed, right? So once after you break out of your loop, um, you then have a block of code that will execute under the else keyword, right? Speaking of breaking out of the loop, the break keyword can be used to exit the loop before that condition becomes false, right? We know that with while loops, when we begin the loop, we are not sure when it's going to actually end, right? We're not sure when it's actually going to cut off. But we know that once a particular condition which we've specified becomes false, we then break out of that while loop. Emphasis on having that condition that makes sure that we do break out of our while loop to ensure that we don't have any infinite loops, right? So the break keyword can be used to exit the loop before that condition becomes false. So in a situation where you decide to use while true, right? I see, even though it's not good practice, I've seen a lot of people use while true to begin their while loop, right? Once you see that you have a while true, one thing for sure is there should be a break in your code, right? There should be the break keyword. So if you have a while true it means that there's nothing that the condition is checking, because you are just hard coding it to being true, right? That's already an infinite loop. That's already, once you say while true, we already have a situation of an infinite loop happening. So if you have a while true, you need to make sure that you have the break keyword, right? Once you have a while true, always ensure that the break keyword is somewhere inside of that while loop. Otherwise, we have an infinite loop, right? We also have the continue keyword, which can essentially be used to skip to the next iteration of the loop, right? So in a while loop, when you have a particular condition where you don't want whatever that's below the continue keyword to execute, you just use the continue keyword to skip to the next iteration of the loop, right? I hope that makes sense. So with regards to the for loop one, the for loop, we use it when we know exactly how many times we're going to iterate. We know when the loop is expected to end. That is a good example usage of a for loop, right? So with the while loop, we're not sure when the loop is going to end, but we know that there's a condition that needs to be met for the loop to continue running. So once that condition is false, we then break out of the loop, no matter how many times that it has ran. But with a for loop, we know exactly how many times we're expecting it to run, or at least the maximum time that we expect this loop to run, right? So the for loop is used to iterate over a sequence, things like your list, tuple, dictionary, set. You can actually also iterate through a string, because a string is a type of an iterable. So when you iterate over your string, you can iterate in each character of your string, whatever the string is saying, you can iterate through each character, right? So it is considered an iterable. So this loop will execute for each item in that sequence. We also have your break as well as continue in your for loop as well, right? So if even though we know when the maximum number of times a loop is supposed to run, if we no longer need, let's say for example we're looking for a particular item in that list, right? Once we find that item, we don't need to continue iterating through whatever that's remaining, right? We can just easily just break off. So that's where we use your break keyword, which will essentially exit the loop before it is iterated all over all the items, right? We also have your continue keyword as well, which once again, like it's used in the while loop, it essentially skips that iteration of the loop, right? So when it comes to for loop, we also have what we call the range function, which you've interacted with a lot. It's often used with the for loop to iterate over a range of numbers, right? So it essentially returns a sequence like how we covered it on Friday by essentially hovering over the range function to see the sequence that it returns, right? So the range function takes in three positional arguments, which is your starts. Your starts as a default of 0, right? And then you have your end, which always needs to be specified, as well as your step, which is a default of 1. Once again, your start is inclusive. So as it has a default of 0, it starts at 0, including 0. And then your end, which needs to be specified, is exclusive, meaning it doesn't actually include it, right? As well as your step, which has a default of 1. So I wanted us to also touch on file handling. I saw with uh, your spam detection, when you're working on your spam detection, how you guys were importing files, how you were not closing them at times, and how, yeah. So I think it's essential that we go through the fundamentals of file handling so that you guys at least have a clearer picture when it comes to that. Cool. So reading from files in Python, we have a bunch of built-in functions when it comes to file handling. So to read the contents of a file in Python, the file must be opened in read mode, which is signified by the letter R. We also have writes. We also have append, and a whole bunch of other modes that you can open your file, right? So we also have a built-in function called the read method. The read method is used to read the entire contents of the file, and it essentially returns everything as one long string, right? Um, so we also then have that. So there's a very huge fundamental difference that you need to understand with the read line, and the read lines method. Those three methods, you can't really use them interchangeably. We'll go through each of them just so you can get the fundamental of essentially what's happening there, right? But before we address that, we have the closing of files, right? So when done reading from a file, or whether you're writing to it or whatever that you're doing with the file, it must be closed using that built-in method called the close method, or the close function, right? So the only time you do not really have to call the close function is if you used with open. So once you use it with open, Python already understands that whatever that is indented inside the with open, that's you manipulating the file, doing whatever that you want to do with the file. And then once you indent out of that block of code, it automatically closes the file for you, right? So there are two ways you can open a file. You can use with open, or you can directly use open. Once you use open, you need to always ensure that you close your file. It's very important, right? But once you use with open, whatever that is indented on the same line as your with open statement is essentially the part where the file is closed for you, right? So we have what we call the read line method, which you can use to read a single line of the file, which you can then specify the line that you want to read, right? You can specify the from position 0 up until whenever the file ends, right? And then we have the read lines method, which is used to return all the lines in the file as a list, right? So this read lines method, um, um, you use it in a situation where you need to have access to each line of the file, where you have a list and each item on that list represents a line in the file, right? So the read method, the fundamental difference is that the read method will return everything from the file as one string, right? One whole string. Everything that's inside of the file will return as one long string. And then there's also the read lines method, which will actually return a list. So that list, each item on that list represents a line in the file, right? Each item on that list represents a line. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that clarifies those three methods that I've seen a lot of people use them interchangeably in cases where it might benefit you to have the file being returned as each line as a list, but you actually use the read method because for you think it's essentially the same, or there's a lot of confusion around it, right? So I hope what I've written down here clarifies that. You have the read method, you have the read lines method, and you have the read line method, which those three serve different purposes, but essentially all of them is just reading from a file, right? So a mouthful. I'll open the floor to questions. If you guys have any question before we move forward, please make sure that you just throw them in the chats. Cool. I'll also make sure that I share these slides with you. Yeah, we'll arrange that once the session is done. Cool. So we've said a whole lot. Now it's time for us to apply what we've learned. We have a bit of a small challenge for you guys, where we'll be creating a program called the class average calculator, right? So we have 15 students from Ubuzobani High School. Don't ask me about the name, also found it like that. So these students wrote a test out of 100, and you are hired to write a Python program that does the following. So this Python program is supposed to, one, read the scores of the learners from a text file named scores.txt, and then goes on to further prompt the user to input a password, which is baby steps 2023. Then displays these scores in the same line and determines and displays the average of the scores, right? So you're gonna read these contents from the text file, which will be there, prompt the user to input the password, display the scores all in the same line, and then display the average of the scores. Right, something to note about the scores and average if the password is correct. Right? Cool. I think we are right on time. We are gonna take 30 minutes. You are allowed to work in pairs, right, with someone that's sitting next to you. And then we will come back at 11 to look at the challenge that you guys have solved, right? I think on your emails you must have received a link to the repo, which you will then fork, clone, and then get right into it. We will continue at 11, and then I'm addressing everything else that we need to address, including solving the challenge itself. Are we all on the same page? Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be back at 11. You can feel free to stay on the call, or you can jump off and come back at 11. Coolies?